Well, good evening. My story begins in 1905. Clearly, I was not the central character at that point in time, but I do emerge a little bit later in the story. I had an Aunt Clara. It seems sort of ubiquitous. Everybody has an Aunt Clara. And my Aunt Clara was born in 1905 in Kentucky, and within a year of her birth, the family moved out to the panhandle of Oklahoma. They were part of that rush with the covered wagons and the whole wagon train out to the panhandle with the promise of fertile farming area and such. And so they lived in the covered wagon until they could build a little shanty. And she was one of 11 children that came along after her. They needed farm hands. And so my family, all sort of my mother's side of the family, emerged from this area. The thing that I remember about my Aunt Clara is her history. She, being born in 1905, had lived through the Great Depression. And she was a school teacher at the time. She was also a teacher, if you know anything about that area of the country during the dirty 30s when the great windstorms were rolling through, and she would have to put blankets over the doors and the windows of the schoolhouse to protect the children from breathing in all the dirt. Times having to tie all of them together to get them to their homes. And so she always had these great stories, but as a kid I could never fully appreciate the stories that she told. So one of the quirky things about my Aunt Clara was that whenever we would have family gatherings, and we had many of them, imagine, she had 11 siblings, they all had children, there were many, many of us that would get together. Aunt Clara would tell stories, she would hang out with the family, but mostly she was found following behind all of us, digging through the trash usually, pulling things out, aluminum foil that had been balled up and thrown in the trash, and she was washing it and folding it and putting it aside for the next use. She would pull all of the plastic utensils out of the trash. She would pull not paper plates, but anything that could potentially be used again. And we thought she was crazy. We're like, why would she do that? And at that period of time, who recycled? And so aluminum cans were going in the trash, everything, and she was always sort of known for going behind. So we would have to take special bags of trash and run them out to the dumpster so that Aunt Clara would not be going through the trash, and that was often the kids' job. It's like, okay, Misty, go get the trash before she gets to it. So I'd run the trash out. And so this was sort of my memory of her for a long time, my crazy Aunt Clara going through the trash, how silly and odd and strange. And then after her passing in 2007, we would often tell stories of her, and we learned that it wasn't the most recent historical documentary of the Dust Bowl days, but it was one that had been done previously by PBS. She was featured in that as one of the storytellers talking about her experiences, and so it was amazing to learn all of these details of her life that we really didn't know about that much. She never married, she never had children, and so when she passed, her home was filled to the brim with all sorts of things, from cleaned, folded up aluminum foil to bits and pieces of furniture, things that might have been broken but were taken from one family's house to her basement, and so maybe much like yours, Jamie. But the family said, what are we going to do with this? Much of it ended up going into dumpsters, being thrown out. Then we fast forward a little bit more. After my mom's passing in 2012, I went back out to the Oklahoma Panhandle to attend the service. I hadn't been out since about 2007. And at this time, you know, everyone recycled. We all recycle things, you know, and so when I got out there and they were still throwing aluminum cans in the trash and they were throwing away all of these reusable items, plastic dishes or plastic containers that I keep my leftovers in, I found myself going through the trash, pulling things out and washing them and storing them so that they wouldn't be thrown away, so that they wouldn't be just disposed of like so many other things. And then I started thinking about all of the items that she had saved over the years, all of the treasures that she had in her home when we were children that we would go through and play with and look at, and that we thought, this is so weird that someone would keep these things. And I discovered that there really is some value in not only keeping those older materials that have some personal value or family value, not just disposing of those things, but to treasure them, to reuse what we could. And I found that I really had a value for not just recycle, reduce, reuse, that sort of thing, but to really appreciate the old. And so to some degree, while it's important for all of us to occasionally purge and all of us to occasionally throw our things away, I truly hope that to some extent we can hold on to a value of not always going out with the old. Thank you.